Welcome back to Atlas Defined. As we move through 2026, the geopolitical chessboard is vibrating with an intensity not seen since the height of the Cold War. In newsrooms, military intelligence headquarters, and financial trading floors across the globe, a singular, terrifying question dominates the discourse. Will Beijing finally launch a full-scale amphibious invasion of Taiwan? For months, global headlines have been saturated with alarming reports of unprecedented Chinese naval drills, massive airspace incursions, and aggressive cyber warfare testing. To the casual observer tracking these daily updates on their feeds, an invasion feels not just imminent, but mathematically inevitable. The mainstream media constantly paints a picture of an unstoppable totalitarian superpower ready to rewrite global borders by brute physical force. But if you possess the analytical discipline to look past the theatrical military parades and dive deep into the structural reality of global trade, finance, and logistics, you will uncover a completely different truth. The reality of 2026 is that behind the fierce rhetoric and nationalistic posturing lies a cold, unyielding economic trap. A full-scale invasion of Taiwan would not be a swift, localized military operation. It would be an act of absolute economic and systemic suicide for the Chinese Communist Party. The modern global economy is no longer a collection of isolated nations. It is a hyper-connected, delicate web of dependencies where the cost of conflict has outgrown the value of territorial conquest. Beijing is trapped in a profound paradox where the very actions required to seize Taiwan would permanently destroy the industrial and financial foundations that keep China alive as a global superpower. Today, we are dismantling the surface-level media hype to expose the unyielding macroeconomic, demographic, and logistical realities that the political class refuses to acknowledge. This is the definitive analysis of why China simply cannot afford to invade Taiwan in 2026. To understand why a cross-strait invasion is financially impossible for Beijing, one must first look at the most valuable, hyper-concentrated resource on the face of the Earth: advanced semiconductors. Taiwan is not merely a disputed island, it is the absolute beating heart of the modern technological civilization. A single Taiwanese corporation, TSMC, manufactures over 90% of the world's most advanced microchips, the invisible engines powering everything from artificial intelligence servers and corporate cloud networks to smartphone processors and advanced military guidance systems. This extreme concentration of critical infrastructure has created what geopolitical analysts call the Silicon Shield. The illusion held by military hawks in Beijing is that seizing Taiwan would give China absolute monopoly control over the future of global technology. But this assumption completely misunderstands the delicate, fragmented nature of semiconductor manufacturing logistics. A modern TSMC fabrication plant, or fab, is not a self-sustaining factory that can be run at gunpoint. It is an incredibly fragile node that relies on a continuous, real-time supply chain of specialized chemicals, software updates, and engineering support from the West. The moment a Chinese missile crosses the strait, TSMC's automated systems are programmed to execute a total digital lockdown, rendering the multi-billion-dollar machinery completely useless. Furthermore, without continuous replacement parts from ASML in the Netherlands and chemical inputs from Japan, these facilities become nothing more than expensive concrete tombs within 48 hours. Because China's own domestic tech infrastructure, industrial robotics, and consumer electronics sectors depend entirely on these exact same chips, destroying Taiwan's fabs means instantly freezing China's own technological future. It is a state of mutually assured technological destruction that Beijing cannot survive. While the semiconductor crisis would paralyze China's high-tech future, a far more immediate and visceral catastrophe would strike its industrial heartlands through the open ocean. China is the world's largest importer of crude oil and liquefied natural gas, requiring an absolute torrent of foreign energy resources every single day to power its massive factories, sustain its electrical grids, and keep its cities moving. And nearly 80% of those vital energy imports must traverse a narrow, highly vulnerable maritime choke point halfway across Asia, the Strait of Malacca. For decades, Chinese leadership has suffered from what they openly term the Malacca Dilemma. In the event of a cross-strait conflict, the United States Navy, alongside a coalition of regional allies, would not even need to engage Chinese forces inside the Taiwan Strait. Instead, they would simply execute a distant naval blockade at the Strait of Malacca and the Sunda choke points, thousands of miles away from China's defensive missile umbrellas. The math behind this blockade is completely brutal for Beijing. China's strategic petroleum reserves are estimated to hold less than 90 days of consumption under strict rationing. The moment the flow of Middle Eastern oil and African minerals is choked off at Malacca, a catastrophic countdown begins for the Chinese economy. Within weeks, commercial shipping stops, industrial manufacturing grinds to a halt, rolling blackouts strike major manufacturing hubs like Shenzhen and Shanghai, and agricultural logistics collapse. China cannot fight a prolonged high-tech war when its entire economic engine is running on a rapidly emptying fuel tank that it cannot refill. The modern financial system is not a neutral utility. It is a highly weaponized, heavily centralized infrastructure governed entirely by Western legal frameworks and the absolute dominance of the United States dollar. In 2026, Beijing has watched the economic demolition of other nations through financial sanctions with intense, calculated anxiety. But while Russia was able to pivot its economy due to its status as a massive energy exporter, China occupies the exact opposite position. It is a hyper-vulnerable, export-dependent economy that is completely integrated into the Western financial architecture. A Chinese invasion of Taiwan would instantly trigger the ultimate financial weapon: the complete disconnection of the Chinese banking sector from the SWIFT international payment network and the immediate freezing of China's $3 trillion foreign exchange reserves. The scale of this financial shock would make previous sanctions look completely insignificant. Over 95% of China's massive international trade is settled in foreign currencies, primarily the US dollar and the euro. The moment China is cut off from SWIFT, its ability to receive payment for its exports or pay for its critical food and energy imports evaporates overnight. International corporations would face immediate legal prohibitions against clearing transactions with Chinese entities, leading to an instant, total freezing of foreign direct investment. The Chinese domestic banking system, already weighed down by trillions of dollars in hidden local government debts, would face an unprecedented systemic collapse as corporate liquidity vanishes. Beijing cannot build an empire on a currency, the renminbi, that the rest of the world cannot and will not use during a global conflict. The mainstream media constantly projects an image of an all-powerful Chinese state with infinite financial reserves ready to fund a multi-trillion-dollar war effort. But if you look beneath the central government's balance sheets and analyze the internal economic landscape of China in 2026, you find an infrastructure that is hollowed out by an unprecedented domestic debt crisis. The engine of China's economic growth for the past 30 years, the massive real estate sector and localized infrastructure spending, has completely run out of steam. The true vulnerability lies within China's local government financing vehicles, or LGFVs. For decades, local municipalities sustained their budgets by selling land to real estate developers and borrowing heavily to build massive, economically unviable infrastructure projects. With the total collapse of the Chinese property market, these local governments are sitting on an estimated $9 to $11 trillion of hidden, toxic debt that they can no longer service. In 2026, local governments across China are already facing severe austerity, cutting public services, slashing civil servant salaries, and struggling to maintain basic municipal functions. A war is an unimaginably expensive enterprise that requires a state to mobilize trillions of dollars in immediate, liquid capital. Beijing cannot afford to pour massive resources into an overseas military campaign when it is actively spending every spare renminbi to bail out insolvent provincial banks and prevent a systemic domestic debt default that would destroy the life savings of hundreds of millions of its own citizens. Wars are not fought by spreadsheets or autonomous machines. They are fought by young men who must execute violent, complex tasks under extreme psychological and physical duress. And it is in this human dimension that China faces its most absolute, irreversible barrier to conflict. Due to the catastrophic, decades-long legacy of the strict one-child policy, China is currently experiencing the fastest demographic aging process in human history, creating a society that is structurally unsuited for high-casualty warfare. The generation of Chinese soldiers that would be ordered to board amphibious landing craft and storm the heavily fortified beaches of Taiwan are entirely only children. In Chinese society, an only child is not just a son. He is the absolute financial security, the future caregiver, and the entire genetic lineage of an extended family structure consisting of 2 parents and 4 grandparents. Geopolitical analysts refer to this as the Little Emperor vulnerability. An amphibious invasion across the treacherous 100-mile Taiwan Strait is widely recognized by military experts as the most difficult, violent tactical operation in modern warfare, guaranteed to result in tens of thousands of immediate casualties. The social shockwaves of thousands of only sons returning to China in body bags would completely shatter the internal social fabric of the country. It would strip millions of middle-class families of their entire future economic survival mechanism, triggering a level of domestic fury, social unrest, and political instability that the CCP's internal security apparatus simply could not contain. The physical geography of the Taiwan Strait is an absolute, unyielding defensive barrier that reduces military superiority to a secondary factor. The mainstream media loves to compare a potential conflict in Taiwan to the war in Ukraine, completely ignoring the fact that Ukraine shares a massive, flat, 2,000-kilometer land border with its invader, allowing for easy armored movements. Taiwan, however, is a heavily fortified mountain fortress separated from the Chinese mainland by 100 miles of some of the most treacherous, unpredictable waters on Earth. The Taiwan Strait experiences severe weather, violent typhoons, and massive tidal swells for the vast majority of the year, leaving only two small, highly predictable invasion windows in April and October when a mass cross-strait transit is even hydrographically possible. This gives Taiwan and its allies months of absolute certainty to prepare their defenses. Furthermore, Taiwan's coastline is a natural nightmare for an invading force. It possesses almost zero open, sandy beaches suitable for large-scale amphibious landings. Instead, the coast is dominated by dense, unnavigable mudflats, sheer sea cliffs, and massive concrete seawalls. The few viable landing zones are surrounded by heavily fortified, high-density urban environments or backed immediately by the steep, impenetrable terrain of the Central Mountain Range. To successfully seize the island, China would have to execute a D-Day scale invasion against an adversary armed with thousands of advanced anti-ship missiles, smart sea mines, and precision artillery embedded deep within mountain bunkers. The tactical reality is that an invasion would instantly devolve into a catastrophic, slow-motion meat grinder that would deplete China's premium military hardware within the first 2 weeks of conflict. The strategic illusion that Beijing could isolate Taiwan and present the world with a quick, irreversible fait accompli has completely dissolved in 2026. The geopolitical landscape of the Indo-Pacific has experienced a profound consolidation, resulting in a highly coordinated, heavily armed regional coalition specifically designed to deter Chinese maritime expansion. Beijing is no longer facing Taiwan alone. It is facing a united front backed by the combined military and industrial might of the Quad and its regional partners. Japan has completely abandoned its historical pacifist posture, aggressively increasing its defense spending and converting its southern islands, which sit just over 100 kilometers from Taiwan, into heavily armed missile basements. Tokyo has made it explicitly clear that a Chinese attack on Taiwan represents a direct, existential threat to Japanese national sovereignty, ensuring that U.S. forces operating out of military bases in Okinawa would have immediate, unrestricted Japanese support. Simultaneously, Australia is rapidly modernizing its long-range strike capabilities. The Philippines has granted extensive base access to Western forces along the northern Luzon Strait, and India maintains a permanent, heavy military posture along China's disputed Himalayan border, forcing Beijing to split its military focus. The moment China launches an attack, it triggers an immediate, multi-front regional war with the world's most sophisticated military powers. Beijing cannot win a localized conflict when the geography forces it to fight a multi-theater world war against an alliance that controls the absolute periphery of the Asian continent. The ultimate foundation of the Chinese Communist Party's absolute political legitimacy does not rest on ideological loyalty to Marxism or military intimidation. It rests entirely on a highly calculated, unwritten social contract established with the Chinese population over the last 40 years. The people accept total one-party rule in exchange for guaranteed economic upward mobility, rising wages, and global prestige. And that economic miracle relies entirely on one single, non-negotiable factor: open, frictionless access to Western consumer markets. China is the ultimate factory of the world, producing a massive surplus of industrial goods, electric vehicles, consumer electronics, and steel that its own domestic population cannot afford to consume. It absolutely must export these goods to the wealthy consumer economies of North America and the European Union to survive. An invasion of Taiwan would instantly shut down that entire trade relationship, erecting an absolute iron curtain of total trade embargoes between China and the West. The result would be immediate, catastrophic structural deglobalization. Within months, thousands of factories across China's manufacturing heartlands would go bankrupt, leading to unprecedented, permanent structural unemployment for hundreds of millions of industrial workers and young university graduates. When the economic engine dies, the unwritten social contract is permanently broken. A population facing sudden economic ruin, mass unemployment, and hyperinflation will quickly turn its fury toward the ruling elite. The CCP knows that a failed or even a prolonged war over Taiwan is the single event that could trigger the absolute, internal collapse of their regime. The macroeconomic data is completely unyielding, and the laws of global supply chain gravity are absolutely undefeated. While the nationalistic rhetoric out of Beijing will continue to dominate the headlines, the cold, hard structural reality proves that China is permanently trapped by its own global success. What are your thoughts on this hidden economic stalemate? Is the silicon shield of advanced technology enough to permanently deter a superpower, or will political ideology eventually override economic survival? Drop your arguments down in the comments below. Let's talk about the real reality behind the global economy. If you are completely done with the superficial, sensationalized media reporting and want the deep, raw truth about the structural mechanics shaping our modern world, make sure you hit that subscribe button to join the archive. Thanks for watching Atlas Defined. We will see you in the very next one.